Gerry, you were chair of the FWA from 2002 to 2005, and Thierry Henry won two of his three Footballer of the Year awards during your tenure. Henry is the only man to have won the award three times. Just how good was he?
Well, I think without doubt, he'd go down in the Premier League era alone as one of the all time great players, and certainly one of the all time great forwards. And he'd probably go down in English football as one of the great strikers to have played in the game here. Scored unbelievable goals, as you know, from every direction. Long range, close range headers, dribbling past people, long range shots, whatever. And in fact, I remember vividly. I'm not sure there was much debate about it the year he won. Certainly the first. I think it was the first year he won the award. But certainly watching in the presentation evening, watching a compilation of goals that Sky Sports had put together to celebrate his award. We normally have the speeches and then we just have a little compilation of that player's showreel almost from that season. It was just it reinforced why we chosen him. It was goal after goal, a bit like Gareth Bale's season when Gareth Bale won it. When you watch that highlights reel of his goals that season, it was like, wow, there were enough goals there to fill another player's career, but in one season he'd scored 10, 20 sensational goals. So yeah, he was something special. And again, he played for a long time at a very high level, and played with a smile on his face most of the time. Largely admired by other fans. Tottenham fans probably didn't have too much love for him, but he wasn't a player that wound up the opposition necessarily. He was just too good for that.
Henry wasn't an instant success in English football. Could you tell me a little bit about how he evolved as a footballer to become the phenomenon that he was?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because he'd gone to Juventus, wasn't it, as a wide player, as a winger, and it didn't really work for him. It clearly didn't work for him, and Arsene Wenger just thought, he knew the player. Arsene Wenger really knew French football really well, and obviously had been monitoring Henry from his early age. Knew that there was a player who could score goals, and he did come in and play largely wide, and the ability to come inside. But certainly for the first half of the season, that first season, it wasn't working for him. He wasn't scoring many goals. He didn't look very confident. And I think over the years we've seen this a lot. Especially players coming from another type of football, different pace of football. The intensity, the speed of the Premier League. And bearing in mind, back then it was a bit more. A bit more physical perhaps than it is now. There wasn't so much. It was a brave team that was going to try and football their way through a game. Play skillful, technical football. You had to be really good to do it. So there were plenty of foreign players who came to England who struggled initially. Dennis Bergkamp was another one at Arsenal. So yeah, it was maybe evolving his position a bit, being more central. Although he still loved to come in off the wing. Or go wide and come inside. But I think getting comfortable with the pace of it and understanding his teammates and obviously the coaching of Arsene Wenger made a huge difference. And, after that first sort of half season where it didn't really click, everything clicked after that.
Do you think Arsenal would have had anywhere near the success they'd had if it hadn't been for Thierry Henry leading the line?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, good question. I mean, again, Arsenal were a really good team. They had a really strong back line, goalkeeper and back four, which really was largely down to George Graham. That was he instilled that defensive ethos. So Arsene Wenger inherited a really good back five, and then added that sort of forward, that stardust going forward with, again, he inherited Bergkamp, but he also brought in Petit and Vieira, who were the midfield engine. And then players like Overmars, Limpar, I think was around in the early period. And of course he brought in other strikers that could work alongside Henry, like Anelka was successful at first, but then, too successful perhaps and moved on. And others who didn't really have the same, anywhere near the impact that Henry had. So he was an ever-present forward threat. You'd have to say, I think if you looked at the Arsenal team of the sort of 2000s and took Henry out of the equation, they probably wouldn't have been as successful. But then they may have brought someone else in who would have scored that number of goals. I think, it's unlikely, but he was the talisman, and he was that tremendous goal scorer.
Thierry Henry is the only player to have won this award on 3 occasions. And I just mentioned his name and there's a big grin on your face there. So what are your memories of him as a player?
Oh, I remember seeing him at 17 breaking through for Monaco as a winger at the time with the little dreadlocks and the moustache, and he had so much swag. I mean, the sauce was incredible. And then being not much younger than him, and to Nicolas Anelka, for example, very similar generation. You knew I was playing football at a really high level when I was a kid, and people would talk at Clairefontaine when you were going with your county team or your regional team or something. People would say, this kid at Monaco, Thierry Henry, is going to be incredible. And he was from Paris like me, so I'd follow very, very early on what he was doing with the youth teams at Monaco, with the youth team for France, and then making his debut with the Monaco first team, then going to Juventus, sort of losing himself a little bit there. It was just not for him. And then coming to England and to Arsenal. And it's just, again, same with Cantona. You have this whole generation of French kids, and especially Paris kids, who grew up watching Arsenal and loving Arsenal because Thierry was there and because he was ripping it up over there. It was as simple as that. You would watch the game just for Thierry, see what he would do, what kind of goal he would score. And we pretty much do something special every weekend. And I think you have all this generation of players, like William Saliba now, who's 19, who could be Thierry's son, who just say like, I'm an Arsenal fan because of him, pretty much, and even if he was very, very young at the time. And that's the impact he had on French people, if you want, from Arsenal. But I think the impact he had on English football was even bigger than anything he could have brought to French football and French fans.
You talk about the impact he had in English football, and he is the only man to have won this award 3 times. There's been 7 who've won it twice, and we're talking greats of the games. We're talking Stanley Matthews, Tom Finney, things like that, players like that. So for Thierry to have won this award 3 times and to do it back to back as well, it was 3 times in 4 years actually. But where would you rank him in terms of foreign players to have played in England, but also just players to have played in England, if we take the Premier League era, for example?
I mean, I'm a bit biased, of course, for the reason I mentioned, but for me, he's the greatest. He's the greatest. I don't think English football ever had someone like him before. Not just the talent, because the talent was fantastic, and I think a lot of it comes from him growing up with a very strict dad who was very demanding football-wise. I mean, on what Thierry would do. I mean, Thierry could score 6 goals in an under-11 game. And then on the way back home from the game, his dad would roast him for 45 minutes on the 2 or 3 chances that he missed after scoring 6 goals. And I think people need to understand that his determination and that ambition, and maybe at times the lack of happiness that he could display on the pitch. People used to say, oh, he never smiles when he scores, or he doesn't. That came from that. He was just never good enough, because he grew up with a dad telling him 6 goals is not enough, 7 goals is not enough. And I think English football was not ready for Thierry Henry. It was not ready. You've never seen anything like this before. That determination, that ambition, the drive, the talent, the physicality, the pace, the intelligence, everything, the swag. Once again, I mean, just watching play and some of the goals is just so elegant, so beautiful. Everything is just so perfect with Thierry, but yet not perfect enough for him. And that's why you always wanted more. And I just think that's why he won this 3 times. That's why he scored all those goals. That's why he had the career that he had, because it was just never enough. He was never good enough. He was not perfect enough. He was never happy. He would wake up one morning, not be happy with something. He would call you saying like, oh, you said that to me in the newspaper, or why? And then you would talk with him for a couple of hours about that. It was just, that was him. And I think that's what makes him so special. That's what makes him unique in my eyes, more than Cantona, more than Bergkamp, if you talk about foreign players, more than Vieira, I don't know, anyone else. And even if you include English players, he's still unique for me. And I don't know if we will ever have someone like him again in England, in English football.
But how about in comparison to the other French greats then? Where does Henry, if you're thinking about players like Zidane, Platini, Fontaine, Coppa, like where is Henry in that ranking?
It's a very interesting debate. I mean, it's not a problem. But he obviously shared his time in the national team with Zinedine Zidane. And, you know, if you look at Raymond Kopa, for example, which was really our first great of the greats, this was his team. 58 is his team. That's his World Cup. France finished third. You had great other players like Just Fontaine, for example, or others, but this was Copa's team. Then in the 80s, it's Platini's team. Yes, of course, Gires is great and Tigana is great and all the others, but this is Michel Platini's team. Thierry arrived with Zinedine Zidane. I mean, Zinedine Zidane is a bit older than him. And that was very much, I think, seen in many people's eyes as Zinedine Zidane's team. And I think, had there not been Zidane, maybe France wouldn't have achieved what they did, but that it would have been Thierry's team. But the fact is, it wasn't. And I think that's why maybe right now, if you ask people, maybe the order is Platini or Zidane number one, depending on your generation and when you were born. For me, Zidane. For my dad, it would be Platini. And then maybe even Copa third. And then you've got Thierry fourth. Maybe Thierry could sneak in third behind Platini and Zidane. And it's just, again, it depends who you're asking for and what you want to go for. But the only little issue I think what he had was a great success as he was. He was very young in 98. And that was very much Zidane World Cup, especially in the final, certainly in the final. And then 2000, Thierry is 2 years older. He's better. But so is Zidane. Zidane is fantastic in that 2000 Euros. And after that, when Zidane retires, it's Thierry's team and it doesn't really go well. 2010 World Cup, 2008 Euros, 06, Zidane is back. And again, this is Zidane's team that reached the final and loses to penalties against Italy. So that's why I think. But let's not make any mistake here. Thierry was immense for the national team for all those years. He's the top goal scorer. He doesn't have the record for caps because I think Lilian Thuram is ahead of him, but he's not far behind, which shows incredible longevity, really. But yeah, just in terms of perception, I still think that Platini and Zidane are a bit ahead of him because of the reason I've just said.